I am a Minneconjou, and our camp was third from the south. We got up late the morning of the fight. The women went out to dig turnips, and two of my uncles were hunting. My grandmother, who was very old and feeble, and one of my uncles and I stayed in the teepee. When the sun was overhead, I went down to the river to swim, and when I came back, all I had on was my shirt. My grandmother cooked some meat in the ashes and fed us. While we were eating, my uncle said, "When you have eaten, you must go to the horses right away. Something might happen." An older brother of mine and another man were herding the horses in two bunches on Muskrat Creek, downstream below the Santee camp. Before I finished eating, there was an excitement outside. Then I heard our crier saying that the chargers were coming. When we heard this, my uncle said, "I told you before that something might happen. You better go right away and help bring in the horses." I crossed the greasy grass, which was breast deep, and got on top of the Black Butte to look on the other side of the Hunkpapas. Toward the south, I saw soldiers on horseback and spreading out as they came down a slope to the river. They crossed and came on at a trot. I started down the butte, but I was barefoot, and there was a big bed of cactus there. I had to go slow, picking my way. A dust cloud was rising up yonder, and I could see the Hunkpapas were running. And when I looked over onto the hills south and east, I saw other soldiers coming there on horseback. I did not go to the horses. I went down through the cactus as fast as I could and into the village. There were voices all over, and everybody was shouting something and running around. After a while, my brother came driving our horses, and my uncle said, "Hurry up, we shall go forth." I caught my gray horse and took my six-shooter and hung my bow and arrows over my shoulder. I had killed a red bird a few days before, and I fastened this in my hair. I had made a vow that I would make an offering if this would keep me from getting hurt in the next fight, and it did. We started and went downstream to the Muskrat Creek, beyond the Santee camp. We were going to meet the second band of soldiers. By the time we got there, they must have been fighting on the hill already, because as we rode up east from the mouth of the Muskrat Creek, we met a Lakota with blood running out of his mouth and over his horse's shoulders. His name was Long Elk. There were warriors ahead of us, the Fronters, who are the bravest and have had the most practice in war. I was 16 years old and was in the rear with the less brave, and we waited with our horses quite a while. Partway up, we met another Lakota. He was on foot and he was bleeding and dizzy. He would get up and then he would fall down again. When we got farther up the hill, I could see the soldiers. They were off their horses, holding them by the bridles. They were ready for us and were shooting. Our people were all around the hill on every side by this time. I heard some of our men shouting, "They are gone!" And I saw that many of the soldiers' horses had broken loose and were running away. Everywhere our warriors began yelling, "Hoka, hey! Hurry! Hurry!" Then we all went up, and it got dark with dust and smoke. I could see warriors fighting all around me like shadows, and the noise of all those hooves and guns and cries was so loud it seemed quiet in there, and the voices seemed to be on top of the cloud. It was like a bad dream. All at once, I saw a soldier right beside me, and I leaned over and knocked him down with the butt of the six-shooter. I think I had already shot it empty, but I don't remember when. The soldier fell off and was under the hoofs. There were so many of us that I think we did not need guns. Just the hoofs would have been enough. After this, we started down the hillside in formation toward the village, and there were dead men and horses scattered along there too. They were all rubbed out. We were all crazy, and I will tell you something to show how crazy we were. There was a dead Indian lying there on his face, and someone said, "Scalp that Ree." A man got off and scalped him, and when they turned the dead man over, it was a Shiloh, one of our friends. We were all crazy. We could see the women coming over now in a swarm, and they were all making the tremolo, We waited around there a while, and then we saw soldiers coming on a hill toward the south and east. Everybody began yelling, "Hurry!" And we started for the soldiers. They ran back toward where they came from. One got killed, and many of us got off and clubbed him. Then we chased all the soldiers back to the hill where they were before. They had their pack mules and horses on the inside, in front of them to hide themselves from bullets, but we surrounded them, and the hill we were on was higher and we could see them plain. We put our horses down under the hills so that they were safe. We all kept shooting at the soldiers and their horses. It was very hot, and there were some soldiers who started down the hill with kettles to get water from the river. They did not get far, and what was left of them went running back up the hill. I heard that some soldiers did get some water later, but I did not see them. Once a Lakota on the other side raced right up to the soldiers to show how brave he was, but they killed him, and we could not get his body. By now it was nearly sundown. I had not been feeling hungry because there was the smell of blood everywhere. But now, I began to feel hungry anyway. The bravest of the braves got together and talked over what we should do that night. They decided that some of us should go home and eat and bring back something for those who stayed to watch the soldiers. We could not get at the soldiers, so we were going to starve and dry them out. I went back home with the others, and it was sundown then. At first I thought they had broken camp, but they had not. They had only gathered all the camps together in one solid village. I did not go back to the hill with the others that night. We built fires all over the camp, and everybody was excited. I couldn't sleep because when I shut my eyes, I could see all those horrible sights again. I think nobody slept. Next morning early, the crier went around and said, "The remainder of the soldiers shall die today." So after we had eaten, we all got ready. This time I was dressed and had my moccasins and leggings on. The day before I had only a shirt. This time I had my saddle too. I was prepared to fight. We all rode over there, and the party that had watched all night went home. We were scattered all around the soldiers with our horses under the hill. But it was harder to hit the soldiers now, because they had been digging in the night. The day was very hot, and now and then, some soldiers would start crawling down toward the river for a drink. We killed some of these, then the others would run back. Maybe some got water. I do not know. We kept shooting at each other. Once I heard someone cry, "Hey, hey!" I crawled over there, and a Lakota had been shot above the eyebrow, and he was dead. After a long while, we heard that more soldiers were coming. Then everybody started back home, and the people were saying, "We will leave this and let it go." Then we all broke camp and started for the Bighorn Mountains. If those soldiers had not come, we would have rubbed them all out on the hill, standing bare.
Red Feather gives his account of the Battle of the Little Bighorn. He speaks in the third person.
The Indians charged twice in the battle at the lower end of the camp. The first time the soldiers were on foot, then they retreated to their horses. In the first charge, Red Feather's horse was shot from under him. He came to an officer who was shot through the stomach who was sitting on the ground, holding a gun in his hand. Red Feather tried to take the gun away, but the officer dropped the gun and grabbed Red Feather. Red Feather was scared to death until someone shot the officer. The cartridges stuck in the gun because it was too hot from shooting. One soldier tried to get around the Indians. The Indians took after him and shot at him, but couldn't hit him or catch him. They saw some smoke and the sound of a gun, and saw him fall off his horse. The Indians went over and he had shot himself. Someone of the Papa band got the horse and tied him to a stake, and everyone went to look at it. The soldiers halted and dismounted and got on a hill. The Indians dismounted too and followed on hands and knees. They couldn't get near, but some crept up. When the soldiers left their horses, the Indians picked them up. The Indians sneaked up the hill in the ravine and behind sagebrush. Red Feather's horse had been shot under him, so he was with the others who were on foot. If either side showed a head, the other side would shoot him down. An old man flying by, who wore a shirt and had his hair tied behind his head, kept shouting, which encouraged the young men. He was the only old man in front with the young ones. Arrows were a great deal used. The soldiers were without caps now. The Indians hid behind little rolls. The soldiers were on one side of the hill and the Indians on the other, a slight rise between them. While they were lying there shooting at one another, Crazy Horse came up on horseback, with an eagle horn, and rode between the two parties. The soldiers all fired at once but didn't hit him. The Indians got the idea the soldiers' guns were empty and charged immediately on the soldiers. They charged right over the hill. Red Feather, yelling, shot into the soldiers who tried to get away. That made it easier for the Indians, who shot them from behind. Red Feather didn't follow them very far but interested himself in taking saddlebags. He got 4, with ground coffee and ammunition in them. It was a terrible battle, the worst he had ever seen, and he, Red Feather, has had some experience. Red Feather considered it a hard battle because both sides were brave warriors. Red Feather.
The Great Father at Washington sent representatives out to our country. The Indians met them and held a council. The Sioux were the hereditary enemies of the Crows. The headman sent by the Great Father said to the Crows, "We must get together and fight and get this land from the Sioux. We must win it by conquest." We called the officer, who was lame, no hip bone. The officer was General Terry. We loved our land, so we consented to go in with the soldiers and put these other tribes off the land. No Hip Bone took me in the winter time, and I went with him wherever he wanted me to go until the next summer. During this journey, I had a good horse. The Sioux took it away from me, and I was left to go on foot, so I put my gun on my shoulder and marched with the soldiers. I thought that I was a man, and had confidence in myself that I was right, and so I kept up with the soldiers. I endured all the hardships the soldiers endured in order to hold my land. We had hardships climbing mountains, fording rivers, frost and cold of winter, the burning heat of summer. My bones ache today from the exposure, but it was all for love of my home. I stood faithfully by the soldiers. They did not know the country. I did. They wanted me for their eye. They could not see. The soldiers were the same as though they were blind, and I used both of my own eyes for them. The soldiers and I were fighting in friendship. What they said, I did. What I said, they did. So I helped my tribe. Land is a very valuable thing, and especially our land. I knew the Cheyennes and Sioux wanted to take it by conquest, so I stayed with the soldiers to help hold it. No Hip Bone moved to Tongue River at the time the leaves were getting full. We heard that General Custer was coming, and I and 30 soldiers went down the river in boats. 2 scouts, Elk and 2 Whistles, were with me. At the junction of the Yellowstone with the Missouri River, we met Custer. I was the first one of the Crows to shake hands with General Custer. He gripped me by the hand tight and said, "You are the one I want to see, and I am glad that you are first." We went into the steamboat with General Custer, and he pointed out different places to me as objects of interest. I directed Custer up to No Hip Bone, who had moved to the mouth of the Little Rosebud. They had a council. Bonnie Bravo was their interpreter. General Custer said to the interpreter, pointing to me, "This is the kind of man we want for this campaign, and I want some others also." Goes ahead. Hairy Moccasin, White Swan, paints his face yellow, and Curly were chosen. There were 6 of us all together. The others were sent back. We always moved ahead of Custer. We were his pilots. We always traveled at night, climbing the mountains and wading the rivers. During the day, we made a concealed camp. We traveled in this way several days before we reached the Sioux camp. When we reached the top of the Wolf Mountains, we saw the enemy's camp near where the Custer field is at the present time. Hairy Moccasin, Goes Ahead, Curly and myself saw the camp. Custer had halted at the foot of a mountain, and we all went back and told Custer that we had seen a big camp, and it was close. Custer was rejoiced and anxious to go ahead and make the battle. The sun was just peeping when we saw the camp. It was 8 or 9 o'clock when we scouts all went ahead again. We got close to the place of the enemy's camp, and Custer divided the scouts, sent some across the river, and the others remained on the hill. In the meantime, Custer had divided his command. Yellowface and White Swan went with Reno across the river. Goes Ahead, Hairy Moccasin, Curly, and myself remained with Custer. Custer sent me to a high knoll. He said, "Go and look for me and see where I can make a success." He left it to me. When I was up there, I looked around and the troops were very close upon me, and I motioned to them to come on, and we passed up onto the ridge. The Indian scouts stood in front of Custer and led his men. We went down to the Little Horn until we came to a little coulee and were moving towards the enemy's camp. We wanted to cross the river at that place. The Sioux fired at us. We then went up the hill to the ridge. I was all along the ridge where the fight was raging. We looked over the river and saw Reno in his engagement with the Sioux. Finally, they wiped out Reno, and he retreated to the hills. Custer and all of us got off our horses here. At that time, the enemy was surrounding us. They were banging away at us. We had a heavy skirmish. Custer then came up and said, "You have done your duty. You have led me to the enemy's camp. And now the thing for you to do is to obey my orders and get away." Farther on, up the river, was a pack train escorted by 300 soldiers, and I made my way to the pack train, and I found the Indians there fighting. Custer, when he told me to go, said, "You go. I am now going with my boys." Had Custer not ordered me to go, the people who visit the Custer field today would see my name on the monument. When I got back to the pack train, I directed them back to where the old trenches are today, and where you may still see a pile of bones. The Indians had killed all the mules when I got there. The fight lasted through the whole of a long, hot summer day. My friends, the soldiers who were with Custer, were all wiped out. When the sun went down, I was about exhausted, and I had no clothes on save a breechclout. All the scouts were dressed like myself. When night came on, exhausted as we were, we scouts went down the river to meet No Hip Bone. We reached him early the next morning. There was a terrific rainstorm all night long. I had no clothes on, and I stuck to my wet horse. My horse was so exhausted that he stumbled on through the night, and today I feel the effects of it. It was my nature to endure. From a boy I had been trained to endure, but as strong as I was, it wounded me for life. We met No Hip Bone and told him that up the river yesterday, when the sun was midway between morning and noon, until the sun was midway between noon and night, the Indians had killed Custer and all of his command, and he was mad. We told him that our horses' hoofs were worn out and asked permission to go back home and get fresh horses. He said, "Yes, you can go, but come back. Meanwhile, I will travel up the river and see the dead soldiers." I went to Pryor, our Crow camp. Custer and the soldiers were my friends and companions, and I cried all night long as I rode through the rain to tell No Hip Bone the news. When we were at the Rosebud, General Custer and his staff held a council as to what we should do when we found the enemy's camp, as to whether we should attack by day or night. I said we had better fight by night. Paints his face yellow said, "Let us attack by day so that we can see what we are doing." I thought I was laying a good plan for them, but they listened to Yellowface. General Custer was a brave and good man, a straightforward and honest man. When General Custer took me by the hand, patted me on the shoulder, and I looked him in the face, I said, "There is a good general. If General Custer was living today, I would get better treatment than I now receive." General Custer said, "Where does your tribe stay?" And I told him in the valley through which Pryor Creek runs, along the Bighorn River at Lodge Grass, and in the valley of the Little Horn, there is my home. Custer said, "If I die, you will get this land back and stay there, happy and contented, and if you die, you will be buried on your own land." When I joined General Custer, I had full confidence in myself and my ability to help him, and for this reason I joined Custer so that I might help hold my land against our enemies, the Sioux and the Cheyennes. After the Custer battle, when we had obtained fresh horses, I took the other scouts with me, and we went over the field and looked at the remains of the dead soldiers who were my friends and companions. Knowing the country, I always directed General Custer to the best places to ford the river. and the easiest way to climb the hills, that he might reach the path of success. After the loss of my horse, I traveled on foot with the soldiers and was willing even to go down to death with Custer in order that I might help him. White man runs him.
Some soldiers came to get water from the river, just as our old men had said they likely would do. The white men crept down a deep gulch and then ran across an open space to the water. Each one had a bucket, and each would dip his bucket for water and run back into the gulch. I put myself, with others, where we could watch for these men. I shot at one of them just as he straightened up after having dipped his bucket into the water. He pitched forward into the edge of the river. He went wallowing along the stream, trying to swim, but having a hard time at it. I jumped out from my hiding place and ran toward him. 2 Sioux warriors got ahead of me. One of them waded after the man and struck him with a rifle barrel. Finally, he grabbed the man, hit him again, and then dragged him dead to the shore, quite a distance down the river. I kept after them, following down the east bank. Some other Sioux warriors came. I was the only Cheyenne there. The Sioux agreed that my bullet had been the first blow upon the white soldier, so they allowed me to choose whatever I might want of his belongings. I searched into the man's pockets. In one, I found a folding knife and a plug of chewing tobacco that was soaked and spoiled. In another pocket was a wad of the same kind of green paper taken from the soldiers the day before. It too was wet through. I threw it aside. In this same pocket, we found white metal pieces of money. I knew they were of value in trading, but I did not know how much was their value. In later times, I have learned they were 4 silver dollars. Later, a young Cheyenne said, "Give the money to me." I did not care for it, so I gave it to him. He thanked me and said, "I shall use it to buy for myself a gun." I do not remember now his name, but he was a son of one horn. After the long time of the slow fighting, about 40 of the soldiers came galloping from the east part of the ridge down toward the river, toward where most of the Cheyennes and many Oglalas were hidden. The Indians ran back to a deep gulch. The soldiers stopped and got off their horses when they arrived at a low ridge where the Indians had been. Lame White Man, the Southern Cheyenne chief, came on his horse and called us to come back and fight. In a few minutes, the warriors were all around these soldiers. Then, Lame White Man called out, "Come, we can kill all of them." All around, the Indians began jumping up, running forward, dodging down, jumping up again, down again, all the time going toward the soldiers. Right away, all of the white men went crazy. Instead of shooting us, they turned their guns upon themselves. Almost before we could get to them, every one of them was dead. The Indians took the guns of these soldiers and used them for shooting at the soldiers on the high ridge. I went back and got my horse and rode around beyond the east end of the ridge. By the time I got there, all of the soldiers there were dead. The Indians told me that they had killed only a few of those men, that the men had shot each other and shot themselves. A Cheyenne told me that 4 soldiers from that part of the ridge had turned their horses and tried to escape by going back over the trail where they had come. 3 of these men were killed quickly. The 4th one got across a gulch and over a ridge eastward before the pursuing group of Sioux got close to him. His horse was very tired, and the Sioux were gaining on him. He was moving his right arm, as though whipping his horse to make it go faster. Suddenly his right hand went up to his head. With his revolver, he shot and fell dead from his horse.
Sitting Bull sits with his nephew and adopted son, One Bull. One Bull was with Sitting Bull at the beginning of the Battle of the Little Bighorn.
I was 23 that summer and had been a warrior a long time. Another Hunkpapa named Gray Eagle and I were Sitting Bull's special bodyguards. It was our duty to watch him and see that he had protection. That morning I took the family horses to the river. At midday I went back to the pony herd and drove the horses to the river for the noon watering. Just then I heard shooting near the Hunkpapa camp circle. I quickly caught a pony and turned the others loose, knowing they would head back to camp. Not far away I saw dust rising and heard iron-shod hooves pounding against loose rocks. I raced back to the teepee I shared with my uncle. The Hunkpapa camp was in an uproar. Warriors were rushing around to catch their ponies. Women were screaming, children were crying, and old men were shouting advice as loud as they could. Then the women and children began to run off to the west, not taking the time to strike their teepees or to carry up belongings. I reached the teepee ahead of my uncle. I grabbed my old muzzle loader and quickly checked it. Just then, Sitting Bull entered the teepee and took the old rifle out of my hands. He handed me a stone-headed war club, then took his own rawhide shield out of its buckskin case and hung it over my shoulder. "You will take my place and go out and meet the soldiers that are attacking us," he ordered. "Parley with them if you can. If they are willing, tell them I will talk peace with them."
Lone Bull and the warriors rode out to meet the soldiers and came under fire straight away. They charged the soldiers and the soldiers dismounted and made for the river.
We killed many soldiers on the riverbank and more in the water. I rode up behind one soldier and hit him with my war club. Then I slid off my pony and held the soldier's head underwater until he was dead. I killed 2 more in the water.
The beginning of the Battle of the Little Bighorn had begun. One Bull survived the battle and died an old man in 1947.
At that time, I was 24 years old and was an enlisted scout under General Custer's command. Mitch Boyer was our interpreter. I was sent ahead. Custer said, "You go and find that village." I went to a butte at the head of Reno Creek, from where I could see the village. I reported the camp to Custer. He asked if any were running about away from the camp. I said no. We then came on down to the forks of Reno Creek. When we stopped there to divide up, I could hear the Indians in camp shouting and whooping. When we separated, Half Yellowface and White Swan were ordered to go with Reno. Goes ahead, White Man Runs Him, Curly, and myself were ordered to go with Custer. We came down and crossed Reno Creek. Mitch Boyer was ahead with the 4 scouts right behind. Custer was ahead of his command a short distance behind us. Custer yelled to us to stop, then told us to go to the high hill ahead. From here we could see the village and could see Reno fighting. He had crossed the creek. Everything was a scramble with lots of Sioux. The battle was over in a few minutes. We thought they were all killed. We 4 scouts turned and charged north to where Custer was headed for. 3 of us stopped to fire into the village. We saw no more of Curly after that. I don't know where he went. When we met Custer, he asked, "How is it?" I said, "Reno's men are fighting hard." We went with the command down into a dry gulch where we could not see the village. Custer told Mitch Boyer to tell us to go back to the pack train, which we did. We met Benteen's command just south of where they afterward entrenched. We said to Benteen, "Do you hear that shooting back where we came from? They're fighting Custer there now." We started to leave Benteen to join the Re-Scouts, who were quite a way back up the creek. But Benteen told us to stay, and we did. We went with him and helped dig entrenchments. The firing seemed to stop where Custer was, and the Sioux came toward us. Then Reno's command came back where we were entrenched. Just before sundown, the enemy drew off. We had been fighting quite a while. We 3 scouts got away and rode till we came to the Bighorn, but did not cross that night. It was dark and raining. The next morning, some Crow scouts of Bradley's command came along and followed us, where we had crossed the river. They joined us, and we all rode to the main Crow camp, 2 sleeps away on Pryor Creek. This is the way it happened, just as near as I can remember. Hairy Moccasin. I discovered almost hidden the dead body of an Indian. I did not go up close to it, but I could see the scalp was gone. That puzzled me. Could this be a Crow or a Shoshone? I had not known of there being any Indians belonging to these soldiers killed here. As I stood there looking, it seemed there was something familiar about the appearance of that body. I backed away and went to find my brother Yellowhair. We 2 returned to the place. We got off our horses and walked to the dead Indian. We rolled the body over and looked closely. Yes, it is Lame White Man, my brother agreed. We called other Cheyennes. Several of them came. All of them promptly confirmed our identification. All of us were satisfied some Sioux had scalped him, or maybe had killed him, Lame White Man, finding him in among the soldiers and supposing him to be a Crow or a Shoshone belonging to them. We knew he had gone with the young men in their charge upon the soldiers there. Perhaps he had gone farther than the others and was killed on his way back to us, the killer mistaking him for an attacking enemy Indian. A bullet had gone in at his right breast and out at his back. He also had many stab wounds. He was still dressed in his best clothing, none of it having been taken. The Cheyennes never made any inquiries among the Sioux concerning the case. We just kept quiet about it. A dead Unkpapa Sioux received something of the same kind of mistaken attention given to our Lame White Man. The dead Sioux was mixed in with dead bodies of the soldiers. An Arapaho and a no-clothing Indian supposed him to be a Crow or a Shoshone belonging to the white men fighters. They jabbed spears many times into the body. They were much embarrassed when they realized their mistake.
The Yanked and I were camping at Old Fort Peck in 1876. 4 of us decided to visit Sitting Bull's camp on the Greasy Grass River. So I, Medicine Cloud, Iron Bear, and Long Tree, with Medicine Cloud's wife, started in the first part of June. We struck Powder River below where Miles City is now and followed the trail leading southwest. We had been in the big camp about 20 sleeps when one morning the women who had been gathering turnips came riding in all out of breath and reported that the soldiers were coming. The country, they said, looked as if filled with smoke, so much dust was there. There were 4 big circles of Sioux and 1 of Cheyennes in the camp. The soldiers charged right up to the edge of the camp, dismounted, and began fighting. The horses became wild and we were still trying to catch them. Very few of us fell, but soon we gathered and charged. It was like a cloud of mosquitoes. We rode right up to the soldiers' skirmish line. Indians and horses fell everywhere, some right among the soldiers. But more Indians were there, and finally we made them run. Then right among them we rode, shooting them down like in a buffalo drive. They ran to the top of a knoll and dismounted, one man holding 4 horses. We dismounted too and filled the gullies that the running water had made in the side of the hill. From there we could shoot straight up at the soldiers. Many of them fell, but the others kept shooting and killing some of us. The fighting continued, and what horses had not been killed stampeded and rushed down the hill across the river, where the women and children were. The women captured them. All the time we kept closing in on them. One crowd of the soldiers left the hill and ran down into a deep ravine, but we gathered on the edge and shot them. After the fight was over and we returned to camp, I heard a bugle and saw on a hill 3 troops of cavalry. One with blacks, one with bays, and one with white horses. They were a lot of our young fellows, dressed up in the uniforms of the soldiers and mounted on their horses. After this, the young men made ready to charge Reno's men, but just then scouts came from down the river, reporting that a big lot of soldiers were coming. The Cheyennes, being at the other end of the camp, got their horses first and did most of the fighting that occurred near the camp and in the retreat. A black man and bloody knife, the chief scout of the Arikara, were the first ones killed. At the end, we rushed among the men on the hill and killed them with clubs and arrows. Even the women, some of them were there. There was such confusion that no honors could be counted, but we took some scalps from those whose hair was long enough. The Cheyennes got most of them. Crow King's 2 brothers were killed on the hilltop, and his sisters came with axes and knocked the brains out of some wounded soldiers. One soldier got down to the river and lay there on his back in the water with only his nose showing. Some Indians watched him for a while, and one shot him with a 6-shooter. Sitting Bull was not in the fighting. He walked up and down, talking to the warriors. After the fight, the Indian soldiers said nobody was to leave camp, for there were many from other agencies and they did not want the fight reported. But Iron Bear and I got away in the night and came back to Fort Peck. Rain in the Face was the bravest man there. Thunder Bear.
David Humphreys Miller was just a boy of only 16 when he took an interest in painting the Indians at Pine Ridge Reservation. The year was 1935. Despite his youth, David had been painting and sketching for years, and he held a special talent for someone who was so young. He was inquisitive and wanted to learn. He took a deep interest in the Indian culture, learning 14 different languages or dialects, including sign languages. He lived with them at times and immersed himself in all facets of their lives. He became so accepted by the Indians at Pine Ridge that he was adopted into 16 separate families. As he painted the veterans of the Battle of the Little Bighorn, he would interview them about the fight, asking questions about their role and what they knew about the role of others. 72 Little Bighorn warriors had their portraits painted. Most were in their 70s, 80s, or older. Miller organized the last reunion of the 9 native veterans of the battle, still alive, in 1948. Pictured here from the left are Little Warrior, Pemmican, Little Soldier, Dewey Beard, Black Elk, John Sitting Bull, High Eagle, Iron Hawk, and Comes Again. One of the warriors' accounts that stands apart from others is that of White Cow Bull, who believes that he shot Custer in the heart while he was looking for a way to cross the river. Here is White Cow Bull's account of that event.
I looked across the ford and saw that the soldiers had stopped at the edge of the river. I had never seen white soldiers before, so I remember thinking how pink and hairy they looked. One white man had little hairs on his face and was wearing a big hat and a buckskin jacket. He was riding a fine-looking big horse, a sorrel, with a blazed face and 4 white stockings. On one side of him was a soldier carrying a flag and riding a gray horse, and on the other was a small man on a dark horse. This small man didn't look much like a white man to me, so I gave the man in the buckskin jacket my attention. He was looking straight at us. The man in the buckskin jacket seemed to be the leader of these soldiers, for he shouted something and they all came charging at us across the ford. Bobtail Horse fired first, and I saw a soldier on a gray horse fall out of his saddle into the water. The other soldiers were shooting at us now. The man, who seemed to be the soldier chief, was firing his heavy rifle fast. I aimed my repeater at him and fired. I saw him fall out of his saddle and hit the water. Shooting that man stopped the soldiers from charging on. They all reined up their horses and gathered around where he had fallen. I fired again, aiming this time at the soldier with the flag. I saw him go down as another soldier grabbed the flag out of his hands. By this time, the air was getting thick with gun smoke, and it was hard to see just what happened. The soldiers were firing again and again, so we were kept busy dodging bullets that kicked up dust all around. When it cleared a little, I saw the soldiers do a strange thing. Some of them got off their horses in the ford and seemed to be dragging something out of the water, while other soldiers, still on horseback, kept shooting at us. Suddenly, we heard war cries behind us. I looked back and saw hundreds of Lakotas and Cheyenne warriors charging toward us. They must have driven away those other soldiers who had attacked the Hunkpapa camp circle and now were racing to help us drive off these attackers. The soldiers must have seen them too, for they fell back to the far bank of the river, and those still on horseback got off to fight on foot. As warriors rode up to join us at the ridge, a big cry went up. "Hoka hey!" The Lakotas were shouting. "They are going!" I saw this was true. The soldiers were running back up the coulee and swarming out over the higher ground to the north. Bobtail Horse ran to his pony, shouting to us as we caught our ponies. "Come on! They are running! Hurry!" He and I led the masked warriors across the ford, for the others knew we had stood bravely to protect the village and willingly followed us. Another warrior, named Yellow Nose, a Sapawikasa who had been captured as a boy by the Cheyenne and had grown up with them, was very brave that day. After we chased the soldiers back from the ford, he galloped out in front of us and got very close to them, then raced back to safety. I began looking for bullets and weapons in the piles of dead bodies. Near the top of the ridge, I saw a naked body and turned it over. The face had little hairs on it and looked like the white man who had worn the buckskin jacket and had looked at me across the ford, the same one I had shot off his horse. I remembered how close some of his bullets had come, so I thought I would take the medicine of his trigger finger to make me an even better shot. Taking out my knife, I began to cut off that finger. Just then, I heard a woman's voice behind me. I turned to see Miotsi and Yellowbird and an older Cheyenne woman standing there. The older woman pointed to the white man's body, saying, "He is our relative." Then she signed for me to go away. I looked at Miotsi then and smiled, but she didn't smile back at me, so I wondered if she thought it was wrong for a warrior to be cutting on an enemy's body. I decided she wouldn't be as proud of me if I cut off the white man's finger, and I moved away, pretending to be busy looking for bullets. I glanced back. Miotsi was looking down at the body while the older woman poked her sewing awl deep into each of the white man's ears. I heard her say, "So long hair will hear better in the spirit land."
We were in camp and not thinking there was any danger of a battle, although we had heard that the long-haired chief had been sent after us. Some of our runners went back on our trail, for what purpose I do not know. One came back and reported that an army of white soldiers was coming, and he had no more than reported when another runner came in with the same story, and also told us that the command had divided, and that one party was going round to attack us on the opposite side. The first attack was at the camp of the Hunkpapa tribe. The shots neither raised nor fell. The Indians retreated, at first slowly, to give the women and children time to go to a place of safety. Other Indians got our horses. By that time, we had warriors enough to turn upon the whites, and we drove them to the hill and started back to camp. Then the second band of white warriors came. We did not know who was their chief, but we supposed it was Custer's command. The party commenced firing at long range. We had then all our warriors and horses. There were 80 warriors in my band. All the Sioux were there from everywhere. We had warriors plenty as the leaves on the trees. Our camp was as long as from the fort to the lower end of our camp here. Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse were the great chiefs of the fight. Sitting Bull did not fight himself, but he gave orders. We turned against this second party. The greater portion of our warriors came together in their front, and we rushed our horses on them. At the same time, warriors rode out on each side of them and circled around them until they were surrounded. When they saw that they were surrounded, they dismounted. They tried to hold on to their horses, but as we pressed closer, they let go their horses. We crowded them toward our main camp and killed them all. They kept in order and fought like brave warriors as long as they had a man left. Our camp was on Greasy Grass River. When we charged, every chief gave the cry, "Hi-yi-yi." When this cry is given, it is a command to all the warriors to watch the chief and follow his actions. Then every chief rushed his horse on the white soldiers, and all our warriors did the same, everyone whipping another's horse. There was great hurry and confusion in the fight. No one chief was above another in that fight. It was not more than half an hour after the long-haired chief attacked us before he and all his men were dead. Then we went back for the first party. We fired at them until the sun went down. We surrounded them and watched them all night, and at daylight we fought them again. We killed many of them. Then a chief from the Unkspapas called our men off. He told them those men had been punished enough, that they were fighting under orders, that we had killed the great leader and his men in the fight the day before, and we should let the rest go home. Sitting Bull gave this order. He said, "This is not my doings, nor these men's. They are fighting because they were commanded to fight. We have killed their leader. Let them go. I call on the Great Spirit to witness what I say." We did not want to fight. Longhair sent us word that he was coming to fight us, and we had to defend ourselves and our wives and children. If this command had not been given, we could have cut Reno's command to pieces, as we did Custer's. No warrior knew Custer in the fight. We did not know him, dead or alive. When the fight was over, the chiefs gave orders to look for the long-haired chief among the dead, but no chief with long hair could be found. Both he and Low Dog said that they did not feel that they would be blamed for the Custer fight or its results. It was war. They were attacked. Custer tried to kill them. They killed him. Crow King.
After a while, it was nearly sundown, and I went home with many others to eat, while some others stayed to watch the soldiers on the hill. I hadn't eaten all day because the trouble started just when I was beginning to eat my first meal. After I showed my mother my first scalp, I stayed with the women a while, and they were all singing and making the tremolo. We could not see much out the battle for the big dust, but we knew there would be no soldiers left. There were many other boys about my age and younger up there with their mothers and sisters, and they asked me to go over to the battle with them. So we got on our ponies and started. While we were riding downhill toward the river, we saw gray horses with empty saddles stampeding toward the water. We rode over across the greasy grass to the mouth of a gulch that led up through the bluffs where the fighting was. Before we got there, the whites were all down, and most of them were dead, but some of them were still alive and kicking. Many other little boys had come up by this time, and we rode around shooting arrows into the whites. There was one who was squirming around with arrows sticking in him, and I started to take his coat, but a man pushed me away and he took the coat for himself. Then I saw something bright hanging on this soldier's belt, and I pulled it out. It was round and bright and yellow and very beautiful, and I put it onto my necklace. At first it ticked inside, and then did not anymore. Elle wore it around my neck for a long time before Elle found out what it was and how to make it tick again. Then the women all came over and we went to the top of the hill. Gray horses were lying dead there, and some of them were on top of dead whites, and dead whites were on top of them. There were not many of our own dead there, because they had been picked up already, but many of our men were killed and wounded. They shot each other in the dust, and I did not see Custer, and I think nobody knew which one he was. There was a soldier who was raising his arms and groaning. I shot an arrow into his forehead, and his arms and legs quivered. I saw some Lakotas holding another Lakota up. El went over there, and it was Chasing the Morning's brother, who was called Black White. He had been shot through the right shoulder downward, and the bullet stopped in his left hip because he was hanging on the side of his horse when he was hit. They were trying to give him some medicine. He was my cousin, and his father and my father were so angry over this that they went and butchered a wasichu and cut him open. The wasichu was fat, and his meat looked good to eat, but we did not eat any. There was a little boy, younger than I was, who asked me to scalp a soldier for him. I did, and he ran to show the scalp to his mother. While we were there, most of the warriors chased the other soldiers back to the hill where they had their pack mules. After a while, I got tired looking around. I could smell nothing but blood, and I got sick of it, so I went back home with some others. I was not sorry at all. I was a happy boy. Those whites had come to kill our mothers and fathers and us, and it was our country. When I was in the brush up there by the Hunkpapas, the first soldiers were shooting. I knew this would happen. I thought that my people were relatives to the thunder beings of my vision, and that the soldiers were very foolish to do this. Everybody was up all night in the village. Next morning, another war party went up to the hill where the other soldiers were, and the men who had been watching there all night came home. My mother and I went along. She rode a mare with a little colt tied beside her, and it trotted along with its mother. We could see the horses and pack mules up there, but the soldiers were dug in. Beneath the hill, right on the west side of the greasy grass, were some blueberry bushes, and there was a big boy by the name of Round Fool who was running around the bushes. He said, "There is a white in that bush." And there was. He had hidden there when the other soldiers ran to the hilltop, and he had been there all night. We boys began shooting at him with arrows, and it was like chasing a rabbit. He would crawl from one side to the other while we were running around the bush, shooting at him with our bows. Once he yelled, "Ow!" After a while, we set fire to the grass around the bushes, and he came out running. Some of our warriors killed him. Once we went up the back of the hill to where some of our men were and looked over, we could not see the whites who were lying in their dug-ins, but we saw the horses and pack mules, and many of them were dead. When we came down and crossed the river again, some soldiers shot at us and hit the water. Mother and I galloped back to the camp, and it was about sundown. By then, our scouts had reported that more soldiers were coming upstream, so we all broke camp. Before dark, we were ready, and we started up the greasy grass, heading for Woodlouse Creek in the Bighorn Mountains. We fled all night, following the greasy grass. My two younger brothers and I rode in a pony drag, and my mother put some young pups in with us. They were always trying to crawl out, and I was always putting them back in, so I didn't sleep much. By morning, we reached a little dry creek and made camp and had a big feast. The meat had spots of fat in it, and I wish I had some of it right now. When it was full day, we started again and came to Woodlouse Creek at the foot of the mountains and camped there. Black elk,